Nobody in the conference room expected the answer they were about to hear. The emergency had finally ended. The waiting room, which had been packed with frightened families only hours earlier, had grown quiet. The operating rooms were being cleaned. Nurses leaned against walls, too exhausted to speak. Doctors stared into half-empty coffee cups, as if they had forgotten they were holding them. 57 trauma patients had arrived at Ridgecrest Regional Hospital in less than 3 hours after a chain reaction crash on the interstate during a heavy storm. Every available bed had been filled. Hallways had become treatment areas. Staff members had worked without stopping, barely noticing the clock. No one believed the hospital could handle that many critically injured people. Yet somehow it had. Hospital director Dr. Alton Voss slowly looked around the room. His white coat was wrinkled, and dark circles rested under his eyes. His voice was calm, but carried a weight that made everyone look up. "I've worked in emergency medicine for 30 years, he said quietly. "I've never seen our hospital survive a night like this." No one answered. He folded his arms. "So, tell me, who held everything together?" For a moment, only the soft hum of the air conditioner could be heard. Then someone near the back spoke. The dismissed nurse. Several heads turned. Another voice repeated it. It was a dismissed nurse. A third doctor nodded. "Leora." The room fell completely silent. Dr. Voss frowned. "Leora Hale?" Nobody laughed. Nobody corrected the statement. Instead, more people slowly nodded. The director looked genuinely confused. "That's impossible," he said. "Leora doesn't work here anymore." Across the room, veteran trauma surgeon Dr. Cedric Rowan rubbed his tired face before answering. "Officially, no. But she was here." The director stared at him. "What exactly are you saying?" Cedric let out a long breath. "I'm saying half the people in this room wouldn't have made it through tonight without her." The words hung in the air. Dr. Voss looked from one exhausted employee to another. Every face showed the same expression: respect, gratitude, and something else: regret. Only 3 weeks earlier, Leora Hale had walked out of Ridgecrest Regional carrying a cardboard box with her belongings. There had been no farewell party, no hugs from management, just quiet whispers in the hallway. Most employees believed she had made a medication mistake that placed a patient at risk. Hospital policy had been clear. She was dismissed. Many accepted the decision without asking questions. Some didn't. Leora had worked at Ridgecrest for nearly 9 years. Patients remembered her name. Families asked for her. Young nurses followed her because she never raised her voice, even during the busiest shifts. She had always been the person who noticed the patient sitting alone, the worried husband, the frightened child. Then, almost overnight, she was gone. No interviews, no explanations, only rumors. As the meeting continued, Dr. Voss struggled to understand. If she wasn't employed, he asked carefully, why was she inside the hospital during an active emergency? No one answered immediately. Finally, charge nurse Brielle Knox spoke. Because she heard what happened. What do you mean? She still listens to the county emergency scanner. Several nurses quietly nodded. When reports started coming in about the interstate crash, Brielle continued, she knew we'd be overwhelmed. So she came. Dr. Voss blinked. Without being called? Yes. Without permission? Yes. The director shook his head slowly. Security should have stopped her. Cedric gave a tired smile. They almost did. That answer pulled everyone's attention toward him. What happened? The director asked. Cedric leaned back in his chair. The ambulance bay was complete chaos. Stretchers were arriving every minute. Families were crying. EMS crews were shouting patient updates. He paused. Nobody noticed Leora at first. She wasn't wearing hospital scrubs. Just jeans, running shoes, and an old gray jacket. Someone across the room quietly smiled. She still had her stethoscope around her neck. Another nurse laughed softly through her exhaustion. She always carried it. Cedric continued. A security officer stopped her near the emergency entrance. What did she say? Dr. Voss asked. Cedric remembered clearly. You can send me home later, she told him. Right now, people need help. The room remained silent. The director slowly sat down. Nobody had mentioned this in the incident reports. Brielle spoke again. She didn't act like she belonged. She acted like patients came first. As ambulances continued arriving that night, nobody had time to argue over employment status. Within minutes, Leora was helping move patients from stretchers. She directed volunteers toward empty wheelchairs. She found blankets before anyone asked. She quietly noticed things everyone else missed. An elderly man whose oxygen tubing had slipped loose. A frightened little boy searching for his mother. A young intern frozen after seeing more critical patients than ever before. She simply walked over. "Take one breath," she told him gently. He looked at her. "You know what to do." The intern nodded, then went back to work. Nobody questioned why they were listening to her. It felt natural. Even experienced nurses found themselves asking her where supplies had been moved. Doctors accepted patient updates from her without hesitation. She never tried to take control. She simply filled every gap before someone else noticed it existed. Hours passed that way. No speeches. No attention. Just steady work. Back in the conference room, Dr. Voss slowly flipped through the emergency timeline. Something bothered him. According to the official staffing records, Leora wasn't there. According to everyone sitting before him, she had been everywhere. The difference made no sense. He looked toward Brielle. Did anyone document what she did? Brielle lowered her eyes. "I don't think anyone had time." Another nurse quietly added, "We thought someone else was doing it." Cedric folded his arms. "You won't find her name in the charts, but you'll find the people she helped." The director closed a folder. He had spent years trusting reports, policies, and investigations. Tonight, for the first time, those papers felt incomplete. Because every person in that room had witnessed the same thing. A nurse who no longer worked there had walked into impossible circumstances and somehow become the person everyone depended on. Just then, a hospital security supervisor knocked gently on the conference room door. "Dr. Voss?" "Yes. I think there's something you need to see." He held up a small flash drive. "We reviewed the emergency entrance cameras." The supervisor hesitated before adding one final sentence. "I don't think anyone here knows everything Leora Hale actually did that night." The room went silent once again as I turned toward the tiny flash drive resting in his hand. The security footage answered one question, but it raised 10 more. Dr. Alton Voss sat in the hospital's small surveillance office as the first video played across the monitor. The timestamp showed the exact moment the first ambulances began arriving after the interstate disaster. Rain poured across the parking lot. Paramedics rushed through the emergency entrance, pushing stretchers one after another. Then, almost hidden in the crowd, Leora Hale appeared. She wasn't wearing hospital scrubs. She carried no identification badge. She walked quickly, her old gray jacket soaked from the rain, a small backpack over one shoulder and her stethoscope around her neck. The security officer stepped into her path. The camera had no audio, but another officer who had witnessed the conversation quietly explained. She told him, "You can ask me to leave after this is over. Right now, every second matters." The officer hesitated for only a moment before stepping aside. Dr. Voss watched silently. The next camera showed the emergency department only minutes later. No one greeted Leora. No one assigned her a role. She simply noticed where help was needed. Within seconds, she was moving extra wheelchairs into the hallway, clearing space for incoming patients. She guided volunteers toward supply rooms they couldn't find on their own. She never stopped moving. Another recording appeared. A frightened father stood beside his teenage daughter, whose arm had been badly injured in the crash. His hands shook so badly that he struggled to fill out the admission paperwork. Leora walked over and knelt beside him. "It's okay," she said gently. "I can't think," the man whispered. "You don't have to think about forms right now." She handed him a pen. "I'll read each question. You answer when you're ready." The man's breathing slowly became steady. Behind him, nurses continued rushing between treatment rooms. No one noticed that one quiet conversation had prevented complete panic from spreading through the waiting area. The next recording showed another moment. A first-year medical resident stood frozen outside a trauma room. His gloves were on. His face had gone pale. Inside, senior physicians were asking for equipment faster than he could process the instructions. Leora approached him without drawing attention. "What's your name?" "Kellen." "Have you done your trauma training?" "Yes." "Do you know what comes next?" He nodded slowly. "I think so." She smiled. "Don't think. Remember." He took one deep breath, then walked through the doors. Hours later, Dr. Cedric Rowan would tell investigators that resident Kellen performed better that night than anyone expected. No one had realized why. The videos continued. Leora never appeared to lead the room. She never gave dramatic speeches. She simply noticed what everyone else missed: a misplaced blood pressure monitor, an empty oxygen tank, a family member who looked ready to faint, a volunteer carrying supplies to the wrong department. Each problem disappeared before anyone had time to worry about it. Dr. Voss leaned back in his chair. "This doesn't look like someone trying to prove a point." Brielle Knox quietly nodded. That wasn't who she was. Cedric folded his arms. She never cared about being noticed. Another clip appeared. An exhausted nurse struggled to lift several supply boxes alone. Before anyone asked, Leora quietly grabbed the other side. "No speeches," the nurse later recalled. "No questions. She just helped." As the footage rolled on, one pattern became impossible to ignore. Doctors instinctively listened when Leora spoke. Experienced nurses trusted her suggestions without hesitation. Even people who knew she had been dismissed acted as though she still belonged there. Not because of her title, because of her judgment. Hours after reviewing the recordings, Dr. Voss began speaking privately with people who had been inside the emergency department that night. The stories were remarkably similar. An ambulance driver remembered Leora calming a frightened elderly woman before she entered surgery. A respiratory therapist remembered her finding missing equipment before anyone realized it was gone. A cafeteria employee recalled her handing out bottled water to worried families waiting through the night. "She treated everyone the same," he said. "Doctors, janitors, patients. It didn't matter." Each interview painted the same picture. Not a dismissed employee trying to return. A nurse who simply couldn't ignore people in need. Yet another question refused to disappear. If Leora had done so much, why had no one fought harder when she lost her job? Late that afternoon, Dr. Voss called Cedric Rowan into his office. The door closed behind them. Cedric remained standing. "You disagree with her dismissal," Dr. Voss said. "I did." "You never came to me." Cedric looked toward the window. "I should have." "Why didn't you?" The veteran surgeon sighed. "Because the investigation looked complete. The reports matched. The paperwork was signed. And honestly," he paused, "I believe there had to be facts I didn't know." Dr. Voss slowly nodded. "Now," Cedric met his eyes. "Now I think we were too willing to accept the easiest explanation." Silence filled the office. Outside, hospital staff continued returning to normal routines. Inside, nothing felt normal anymore. Before Cedric left, he stopped at the doorway. "Director?" "Yes." "You've watched the cameras. You've heard the witnesses. But you're still missing the biggest piece." Dr. Voss frowned. "What do you mean?" Cedric answered carefully. "Everyone thinks Leora came back because she loved this hospital." He shook his head. "She didn't. She came back because she made someone a promise." Dr. Voss stared at him. "A promise?" Cedric nodded. "But it wasn't made to the hospital. It was made to someone whose name never appeared in the investigation." Before the director could ask another question, his office phone rang. It was Human Resources. Their voice sounded unusually tense. "Director Voss." "We've been reviewing Leora Hale's dismissal file." A brief silence followed. "There's an entire section missing." The line went quiet. Then came the words that changed everything. "And we have no record of who removed it." A missing file was one thing. A missing truth was something else entirely. Dr. Alton Voss stood inside the records department early the next morning, staring at Leora Hale's personnel file spread across a large conference table. Human Resources had gathered every document they could find, but something was clearly wrong. The pages were numbered. Page 18 jumped to page 24. Everything in between had disappeared. Has anyone checked the digital archive? Dr. Voss asked. A records supervisor nodded. We did. And the electronic copies are missing too. The room fell silent. Someone had removed more than paper. Someone had erased evidence. Dr. Voss rubbed his forehead. Who had access? The supervisor hesitated. Very few people. Can we identify them? We're working on it. Before anyone spoke again, there was a quiet knock at the open office door. Everyone turned. Nurse Tamsin Greer stood there, holding a small notebook against her chest. She looked as though she hadn't slept. Director? Her voice barely carried across the room. May I speak with you? A few minutes later, they sat alone inside Dr. Voss's office. Tamsin kept looking down at her hands. I should have come sooner. Dr. Voss waited patiently. What would you like to tell me? Tears filled her eyes before she even spoke. The investigation. She stopped. It wasn't the whole story. The director remained silent. He knew interruptions often stopped people from telling difficult truths. Finally, she continued. The medication mistake everyone blamed on Leora. It wasn't only her responsibility. Dr. Voss leaned forward. What do you mean? There was a system failure. She swallowed hard. The medication scanner froze. Our backup process was confusing. I was new. I panicked. Her voice trembled. I entered the information incorrectly. The office grew very quiet. Dr. Voss asked carefully, Did anyone know? Tamsin nodded once. Leora. And what did she do? Another tear slipped down her cheek. She fixed the patient before anyone was harmed. The director listened closely. Then why was she dismissed? Tamsin closed her eyes. Because she wouldn't let me take the blame. Dr. Voss stared at her. She accepted responsibility? Yes. But why? Tamsin's answer came almost as a whisper. She said one mistake shouldn't end someone's career. I told her I'd confess. She refused. Flashbacks filled Tamsin's mind. She remembered sitting in the empty break room weeks earlier, crying so hard she could barely breathe. Leora had quietly handed her a cup of coffee. I'm going to tell them. Tamsin had insisted. No, Leora replied gently. But it was my documentation. It was our system. I still made the mistake. Leora shook her head. You made one mistake during one impossible shift. I've spent 9 years earning trust. If someone has to lose theirs today, she smiled sadly. Let it be me. Back in the present. Tamsin covered her face. I let her do it. You were frightened? Dr. Voss said softly. I was selfish. No, I was. She looked directly at him. Every day after she left this hospital, I wanted to tell someone. But every day became harder. Dr. Voss slowly stood and walked toward the window. Outside, nurses crossed the courtyard between buildings. Patients arrived for routine appointments. The hospital looked peaceful. Inside his office, everything had changed. He turned back toward Tamsin. Was the patient injured? No. Was anyone placed in danger afterward? No. The medication was corrected immediately. Then why wasn't this investigated further? Tamsin took a shaky breath. Because everyone wanted a quick answer. The paperwork matched. The reports looked complete. And Leora never defended herself. Those words stayed with him. She never defended herself. Hours later, Dr. Voss requested the original equipment maintenance logs. The biomedical engineering department responded almost immediately. A technician arrived carrying several binders. We found something unusual. He opened one of the records. The barcode medication scanner failed 3 times that week. Dr. Voss frowned. 3. Yes. It had already been reported and repaired. The technician slowly shook his head. No, it was waiting for replacement parts. The director felt a knot forming in his stomach. So the equipment really was malfunctioning. According to these reports, yes. Another piece of the puzzle fell into place. Later that afternoon, Dr. Cedric Rowan joined the meeting. He quietly reviewed the maintenance records before looking at Dr. Voss. This changes everything. It certainly raises questions, the director replied. Cedric looked toward Tamsin. No, it answers one. Both of them looked at him. Leora wasn't protecting herself. She was protecting someone else. For several moments, no one spoke. Finally, Dr. Voss asked the question everyone had been avoiding. Why didn't she tell the truth later? Cedric smiled sadly. Because once the decision was made, she thought reopening everything would only hurt more people. The room became silent again, not because they lacked answers, because they finally understood the kind of person Leora really was. As the meeting ended, Dr. Voss made a decision. I want every document related to this case reviewed. No exceptions. Every email, every maintenance report, every witness statement. Before anyone could leave, his assistant hurried into the office carrying a sealed envelope. It was delivered this morning. There's no return address. Dr. Voss opened it carefully. Inside was a single flash drive. No letter. No explanation. Only a small handwritten note attached with tape. It read, "Watch the conference room. Recording from the day Leora was dismissed." They didn't know the microphone was still on. The room froze, because if that recording still existed, someone had been hiding far more than missing paperwork. The recording changed the mood in the room before anyone even pressed play. Dr. Alton Voss, Dr. Cedric Rowan, Tamsin Greer, and two human resources officials sat quietly around a conference table. The flash drive had been checked by the hospital's IT department, and the video was authentic. It came from the security system on the day Leora Hale had been dismissed. The meeting itself looked ordinary. Managers reviewed paperwork. Questions were asked. Policies were mentioned. Everything seemed routine. Then the meeting officially ended. Several people stood to leave. Someone forgot that the room's recording system was still capturing audio. One administrator sighed. At least this closes the issue. Another voice answered. It was the fastest way. Dr. Voss frowned. The voices continued. We don't have time to reopen every equipment failure report. And if word gets out that the scanner had known problems. The sentence was never finished. Another person quietly said, one dismissal is easier than a public investigation. Nobody in the room watching the recording spoke. The silence felt heavier than the conversation itself. Cedric slowly leaned back in his chair. So they knew. Human Resources Director Elaine Mercer lowered her eyes. They suspected enough to ask the questions. They simply stopped asking. Dr. Voss paused the video. His expression remained calm, but disappointment showed across his face. This hospital was built on trust. No patient can trust us if we refuse to face our own mistakes. No one argued. Just then, the emergency department pager interrupted the silence. 3 short alert tones echoed through the building. Moments later, another announcement followed over the hospital speakers. Attention all available emergency personnel. Multiple patients inbound following a commuter bus collision. Prepare for mass casualty response. Every person in the room stood immediately. Dr. Voss looked toward Cedric. How many? Cedric checked his phone. EMS estimates more than 30. Within minutes, the calm hospital transformed once again. Stretchers rolled into hallways. Treatment rooms filled. Staff members hurried toward their assigned stations. Despite weeks of reviewing emergency procedures after the interstate crash, the sudden influx of patients still placed enormous pressure on everyone. As Dr. Voss reached the emergency department, he immediately noticed something. People were working hard, but something felt different. Small delays appeared everywhere. New nurses looked uncertain. Volunteers asked repeated questions. Communication wasn't flowing as smoothly as before. Brielle Knox approached him. We're managing, but barely. Dr. Voss looked around. Without saying it aloud, he realized what everyone else had already noticed. Leora wasn't there. Then, through the glass entrance doors, a familiar figure appeared. Leora stood outside wearing a simple blue rain jacket. She wasn't trying to come inside. She wasn't asking anyone for permission. She simply watched the ambulances arriving. For a brief moment, she turned as though she intended to leave. Dr. Voss walked quickly toward the entrance. The automatic doors opened. Leora looked surprised to see him. "I heard the emergency call," she said quietly. "I know I shouldn't interfere." She started taking a step backward. "I was just making sure you had enough people." Dr. Voss stopped her. "Leora," she waited. "I owe you more than one apology." She gently shook her head. "This isn't the time." "No, it isn't." He looked toward the crowded emergency department. "It is, however, the time to ask for help." Leora remained silent. "You know you're no longer employed here," he continued. "I do. But right now," he took a deep breath, "I don't need an employee. I need the nurse everyone trusted." She looked through the glass toward the busy treatment area. "I don't want anyone getting into trouble, because I'm here." Dr. Voss answered immediately. "If anyone has questions, they can speak to me." For several seconds, she said nothing. Finally, she nodded once. "I'm here for the patients." Together, they entered the emergency department. No announcement was made. No one formally introduced her. Yet almost immediately, the atmosphere changed. Not because she took control, because she quietly restored order. She noticed that arriving families had no clear waiting area. Within minutes, volunteers were guiding them correctly. She asked one nursing student to focus only on restocking supplies instead of trying to assist everywhere at once. She reminded another staff member to rotate breaks before exhaustion caused mistakes. None of her instructions sounded like commands. They sounded like calm reminders from someone who had lived through difficult nights before. Resident Kellen saw her across the hallway. A relieved smile crossed his face. "I was hoping you'd come." She smiled back. "You already know what to do." Nearby, Tamsin watched everything quietly. The guilt she had carried for weeks felt even heavier. Every person Leora encouraged reminded her of the sacrifice that had cost such a kind nurse her career. Later that afternoon, one frightened little girl refused to let go of her father's hand before he was taken for surgery. Doctors were running out of time. Leora knelt beside her. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded paper crane. It had become worn from being carried for years. "My grandmother taught me to make these," she said softly. "When someone borrows one, they have to bring it back after everything gets better." The little girl carefully accepted it. "You promise?" "I promise." The child finally released her father's hand. Several nurses nearby smiled through tired eyes. Small moments like that never appeared in medical charts, but everyone remembered them. As evening approached, the last ambulance departed. The emergency department slowly returned to normal. Dr. Voss looked across the room. Doctors, nurses, technicians, housekeeping staff. Everyone worked together with a confidence that had been missing only hours earlier. He understood something important. Policies could organize a hospital. Experience could teach procedures. But trust was built by people like Leora. Just as he started walking toward her, his phone rang. It was the chairman of the hospital's governing board. Dr. Voss answered. "We need to talk immediately," the chairman said. "The State Medical Review Committee has received new evidence." A pause followed. "They're reopening Leora Hale's dismissal case." Dr. Voss looked across the emergency department. Leora had no idea her future was about to change forever. The room was quieter than anyone expected. A week had passed since the State Medical Review Committee reopened Leora Hale's dismissal case. Every interview had been completed. Every report had been examined again. The missing documents had been recovered, the maintenance records verified, and witness statements compared against the security footage. The truth no longer depended on rumors. It was written in the evidence. Hospital employees filled the main conference hall that Friday afternoon. Doctors sat beside nurses. Paramedics stood along the walls. Housekeeping staff, volunteers, receptionists, and administrators all gathered for the same reason. No one knew exactly what Dr. Alton Voss planned to say. Leora sat near the back of the room. She had almost declined the invitation. She disliked being the center of attention. She would have preferred another shift in the emergency department instead. When Dr. Voss stepped onto the small stage, he carried only a single folder. He looked across the room before speaking. "Every hospital has policies," he began. "They protect patients. They guide difficult decisions." He paused. But policies only work when they're supported by honesty. The room remained completely still. For several weeks, he continued, this hospital believed it had dismissed a nurse because she had failed her responsibilities. He slowly closed the folder. We were wrong. Several people lowered their heads. The investigation found that critical equipment problems had already been reported. It found incomplete documentation. It found that responsibility was placed on one person when the truth was far more complicated. He looked directly toward Leora, and it found that Nurse Leora Hale accepted blame to protect a colleague who believed one mistake would end her future. A quiet gasp moved through the audience. Many employees had heard pieces of the story. Few had known all of it. Tamsin Greer stood from her seat before anyone asked her to. Her hands trembled slightly. I need to say something. Dr. Voss nodded. She turned toward the audience. My mistake started everything. I was afraid. I stayed silent. She looked at Leora, and she carried a burden that belonged to both of us. Tears filled her eyes. I wanted to apologize every single day. Leora slowly stood. She crossed the room without speaking. When she reached Tamsin, she placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. You've already done the hardest part, she said softly. You told the truth. Tamsin wiped away her tears. I should have done it sooner. Leora smiled. But you did it. Sometimes those simple words carry more healing than any speech. The room remained silent as the two nurses embraced briefly. Several staff members quietly wiped their eyes. Dr. Cedric Rowan looked toward the younger residents, sitting together. Remember this day, he said. Medicine isn't only about treating patients. It's also about having the courage to admit when we were wrong. No one disagreed. Dr. Voss stepped forward once more. There is one more matter. He removed a document from a folder. Effective immediately, Leora Hale's dismissal has been completely overturned. Applause erupted throughout the room. It wasn't loud at first, just a few people. Then more joined. Soon every person inside the conference hall was standing. The applause continued far longer than anyone expected. Leora looked overwhelmed. She had never wanted recognition. She had only wanted patients to receive care. When the applause finally faded, Dr. Voss smiled. On behalf of Ridgecrest Regional Hospital, he extended the document toward her. I would like to offer you your position back. Another quiet cheer spread through the room. Leora accepted the envelope, but didn't open it immediately. Instead, she looked around at the people she had worked beside for nearly a decade. I appreciate this, she said, but I have one request. Dr. Voss nodded. Name it. I don't want anyone remembered as the villain. Several administrators looked surprised. She continued, we all make mistakes. What matters is whether we learn from them. The room fell silent again. Dr. Voss smiled. I believe we just did. Later that afternoon, Leora changed into her familiar navy blue scrubs. The fabric felt strangely familiar after so many weeks away. As she walked through the emergency department, smiles greeted her from every hallway. Resident Kellen waved from the nurse's station. I'm glad you're back. She laughed softly. I don't think I ever really left. Near the waiting area, a little girl ran toward her. Leora recognized her immediately. She was a child from the bus accident, the same little girl who had borrowed the folded paper crane. She proudly held it out. I came back like I promised. Leora accepted the paper bird with a warm smile. You kept your promise. My dad's home now. I'm happy to hear that. The little girl hugged her before running back to her family. Brielle walked over. You know, she said, that crane has become famous around here. Leora laughed. I'll have to make another one. As evening settled outside, the emergency department returned to its familiar rhythm. Phones rang. Monitors beeped softly. Patients arrived with everyday emergencies. Nothing looked extraordinary, yet something had changed. Trust had returned. Not because one person had been praised, because everyone had chosen honesty over comfort. Before leaving for the night, Dr. Voss paused outside the emergency department doors. He looked back at Leora as she quietly helped an elderly patient into a wheelchair. No cameras followed her. No audience applauded. She was simply doing what she had always done, putting someone else first. Dr. Voss smiled to himself. On the night of the interstate disaster, he had asked one simple question: who saved 57 trauma victims? Now he finally understood why so many people had answered the same way. It had never been about one dramatic moment. It had been about hundreds of quiet choices made with compassion, courage, and humility. And sometimes, the greatest heroes in a hospital were the ones who never asked to be noticed at all.